Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today within our innovation stage. We have an amazing panel here for us. And to kick it off, I'm going to kick it over to Devin, who will facilitate some introductions for everyone that is on right now. If everyone could turn on their microphones and video. Hey.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Is it cool if I take it over now?
All you. Yeah, I'll be here if you need anything. Give me a holler.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining the Future of AI for Good is Now panel. My name is Devin Krotman, and I'm a director at the XPRIZE Foundation. We're really excited about today's panel. It's a little bit different than the other topics you might be hearing, but we think it's super relevant given where we are today as a society. So I'm going to give a quick intro about my organization and tell you a little bit more about this panel today, and then I'll allow the panelists to introduce themselves and tell you why they're here today. So as I mentioned, I work at the XPRIZE Foundation. We are a nonprofit based in Los Angeles, California. And what we do is we run large-scale incentivized competitions to enable breakthroughs and accelerate the future. So think of it crowdsourcing on steroids, basically. What we're known for probably the most is the initial Ansari XPRIZE, which helped launch today's private space industry. So the IP from that was bought by Virgin Galactic and kickstarted the entire private space race that you see today. Flash forward 25 years, and now we're running prizes in a variety of domains, from energy to literacy to emerging technology. It kind of runs the whole gamut. So it's interesting from that perspective that, you know, our organization as a nonprofit has multiple different missions at any time. Since 2016, XPRIZE has operated the IBM Watson AI XPRIZE competition. And this is a $5 million global competition challenging teams from around the world to apply AI, and that can be any sort of AI, to be ML, NLP, to different challenges facing humanity. And it's all about accelerating the AI for good narrative. So today, this particular panel will feature 3 of the top organizations from that competition, and we're going to focus on their work in the AI for good space. In particular, this panel is going to focus on why AI for good is a timely dialogue and its future potential, the challenges around AI for good, and what it takes to operate a company in this new space. In short, what we hope everyone gets from this panel is we hope everyone understands how AI for good and these particular solutions that you'll hear about today can build a better future state for humanity. So with that said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce the panelists. So I'll let them introduce themselves, their organization, and the work that they're doing. So I'll let Ellie introduce herself first.
Hi, I'm Ellie Gordon. I'm the founder and CEO of Behaivior. I'm a behavioral technologist, biotech entrepreneur, and UI UX designer. And Behaivior has developed a system to predict and prevent addiction, relapse, and overdose using wearables like a Fitbit and AI for timely interventions. And our initial focus is opioids, including prescription pain pills, heroin, and fentanyl.
Thank you, Ellie. Anita, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Anita Brede. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Iris.ai. We are doing something entirely different, but also important. In a different way, we are building in what we call an AI researcher, or an AI system that will make sense of all of the academic scientific literature in the world, ranging from papers to patents and beyond, and building smart tools for efficient leveraging of that information.
Thank you. Charles, you want to go?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Charles Yapp, CEO and co-founder of CleanRobotics. Our company has a core product called TrashBot. It's a system that uses AI, computer vision, and robotics to detect waste as you throw it away. And then it robotically separates landfill from recycling from compost about 300% more accurately than the public. My background is in social entrepreneurship, so I get involved or start organizations that have triple bottom lines, so profit motive, social bottom line, environmental bottom line, doing all those things with CleanRobotics. So it's a real pleasure.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So we have a series of questions. I think we'll kind of disperse them out randomly depending on time. So actually, Charles, I was going to go ahead and start with you. You know, you and I came to visit your company in Colorado in December, and thankfully it wasn't snowing too hard, but it was really great to kind of see TrashBot in action and see how it works. So you talked to me about this in December, but I'd like for you to kind of tell the audience what led you, in particular, your organization, to start thinking about how to use AI for your particular environmental problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, going back in time, the idea was really born out of frustration. The example I always use is, and I'm not picking on them, but many people have gone to Whole Foods, they get something at the hot bar, they eat the food, and then on their way out, they're kind of confronted with an array of waste bins. And to this day, I'll still have the experience where I kind of like shift my weight and hem and haw, and I'm not sure I'm putting things in the correct place. And so we got to thinking, I bet you there's a way we could build an AI and a robot that does this more accurately and effectively than human beings. And then when we started looking into the numbers of, how bad recycling actually is in the United States and in the world, and some of the cost aspects of it, AI algorithms were becoming increasingly accessible, sensors were becoming really cheap, robotic components were becoming really cheap. We thought that we really had, a business potential here and the ability to really do some good with it too.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think, kind of understanding your backstory and what brought you into this field is super important. Anita, the next question is actually going to be for you, if you're okay with it. So, you and I were collaborating on the Google Doc a couple days ago, and, there's so many challenges. I think AI for good has become this ever-present topic, especially within the last 5 years. Google has their AI for good arm, Microsoft has an AI for good vertical, and IBM was at the forefront with this, kind of sponsoring this competition. And I think in those last 5 years, you've seen an exponential, kind of increase in terms of AI for good. But I think because of that, people don't talk about the challenges enough. So I'd be curious to hear from you, and I'll probably ask Ellie the same question, is like what some of the challenges you have faced in terms of operating a company in the AI for good space?
Right. So I think one of the main challenges, I think, is running for us a for-profit venture where we have taken in investors, venture capital. Most venture capitalists, most startups will all say that, like, no, we're doing this for good, for the betterment of the planet, saving the world and all of that. Most VCs will have that, listed on their website, that we do this for the right reasons, etc. But then when it comes down to it, when you start to make the hard decisions, where do we start in terms of the market? I mean, for ours, in our specific case, it was about selling to academics, offering tools to academics, and there's just a certain limit to the price you can take, or you can charge. And I think once you get down to it and you start making decisions that are actually based on, how can we maximize the good that we can make? Once you start making those decisions, they are at the expense of the money you can make or the scale you can grow at or a number of different things. And that's where, for example, getting funding starts becoming tricky, because everyone wants to make the world better. But then when you start to make the unpopular decisions for a venture capitalist, well, guess what? Your chances of getting that money is gonna go down. And so I think if you have an organization that is genuinely committed to doing good, it will decrease, for example, your chances of getting properly funded, because you're going to take some fundamental decisions that aren't going to look that good to a venture capitalist.
One piggyback question off that before I ask Ellie the same thing is, do you think, what's the future roadmap look for like that? And do you see funding, the obstacle of funding getting any better? Is it getting worse because of the climate that we're in 2020, or what's your prediction?
Well, let's 2020 is a year on its own, right? Let's not. I mean, obviously, things right now are for a lot of funding bodies, and everything is just on a break. Hopefully, that we can kind of get through these rough times, and things will not get back to normal, but at least we'll find a new normal. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, I mean, what I've been observing, but this comes from a European perspective and specifically a Norwegian perspective. What's really interesting is that in Norway, there's a lot of families with money where the children of those families are now in their late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, and are starting to question, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I've always had all the money I need. What am I doing with my life? How can I positively contribute? And so we're seeing a lot of of impact investors who have like older money, let's call it that, and who are now genuinely looking for impact projects to put those money in as, you know, potentially financial focused investments, but that has that clear impact focus. So I think I've seen that in Norway, I've seen it especially, but I've seen it other places too. So I think we're seeing an increasing trend of wanting to give something to the world, wanting to contribute, and a realization that, you know, not-for-profits, while some not-for-profits like the XPRIZE are doing really well, it's also a way of a mode of working that isn't the only way to make impact.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, that's a great answer. Thank you. And I think it kind of steers back to what Charles was alluding to earlier about this triple bottom line concept, and hopefully that will become more prevalent in the future. So Ellie, you know, I'd love that, you know, I know your company pretty well. I'd love to hear your take on some of the challenges and obstacles that Behaivior has faced.
Sure. So yeah, that's a great question. And similar to Anita, we have also had those concerns regarding the higher level investors really having a primary single goal of a quick return. And additionally, when you add in the element of the biotech involving health and clinical studies, that tends to create a longer time frame. And when dealing with a population that can be at high risk, we want to make sure that we're doing everything properly. And so our timeframes are a little extended. A lot of times the tech entrepreneurs who are interested in AI investments, they tend to really want those quick turnaround times. And so I think that getting folks educated about what AI can do in the healthcare space, when it is involving, you know, clinical studies, things like that, the time frame that does take a little longer, it can still have a great return on investment. Luckily, in our case, we are lucky to be able to have a great financial opportunity in addition to the impact. And something that is very important to us is making sure that people aren't left behind, so that the opportunity would not focus more so on individuals that have more privilege and a higher socioeconomic status. It's very important to us to democratize addiction recovery. And while inherently our tool will be able to do that, we want to make sure that our focus will be maintained on not only on individuals who have higher incomes and have more privilege, but also those who are at a greater disadvantage. And that can sometimes be in a direct opposition to folks who are really all about that single thing. So like Charles and Anita said, the triple bottom line is very important. So finding social impact investors who are able to really prioritize creating positive change in the world is really important. Additionally, another barrier that is interesting is with acquiring training data for modeling, there are some barriers for individuals struggling with addictions. There's a lot of red tape due to societal stigma that has definitely lessened. There have been efforts on the governmental level to reduce the red tape that have been positive, as well as data sharing opportunities that have been created by NIDA, for example, that we're very grateful for. However, in order to get our specialized data, we do need to conduct clinical studies. So we have completed some clinical studies, and we will need to do more to finish other elements that we would like to incorporate in terms of response interventions. So some of those things as well, it's new data that doesn't exist. We're working in a new area. And so with AI, needing data can be a challenge, particularly in areas where it would require specialized acquisition through clinical studies.
Yeah,
if it's all right, I'd like to chime in on challenges and funding too.
Yeah, let me ask one quick follow-up question to Ellie, and then I'd love to get your thoughts on this because I think this is just, it's really important. So Ellie, like, yeah, thank you for talking about the data and the funding piece, and the AI, the AI is only as good as the data that we have, right? So I did I want to actually, I will go to Charles, but I want to circle back on this idea of education and AI literacy, because I think that's a good segue for all of us to talk about. But Charles, yeah, I would love to hear about your challenges and obstacles and what you're going through over at CleanRobotics as well.
Yeah, so if you're trying to build an organization that is like focused on doing good and not just making profit, then my personal training is in international development, right, and kind of building social good organizations, and that field in general has borrowed this kind of ethical rule of thumb from medicine, and I'm sure everyone hears this, do no harm kind of requirement, right? And so as I think about CleanRobotics, I'd like to believe that we're pretty rigorous about assessing our potential for harm and how our technology could have unintended negative consequences. So you're building a profit-driven company that is also trying to do good and also trying to make sure that it's not doing hard. It kind of makes the job of social entrepreneurship like really complicated, right? So to kind of piggyback off of Anita's comments, when you're trying to paint a picture to your average VC about all the things that you're considering, one of the challenges is that if they're just looking for a quick 10x return in 3 to 5 years, it makes it difficult to have a compelling argument, a compelling conversation, because they're just thinking you're like really distracted and worried about things that I don't care about at all, right? And one of the interesting things that, again, piggybacking off of Anita, and you mentioned that what you're seeing in Norway, where folks from rich families are looking to have an impact with the money that they've just been like born into. I think that's something that's happening globally. If you kind of look through the numbers, family offices around the world have way more money than venture capital, right? And in many cases, they exceed many sovereign wealth funds. So like funds that governments have to invest in whatever they feel like, family offices exceed that by a lot. And so I think as we look at AI for good and more broadly ventures that have the potential to have a positive social impact, family offices are definitely going to be a big target for fundraising. Another kind of innovation that's happened in the fundraising space is from foundations. They've created recently, like in the last 10 years, what they call PRIs, program-related investments, which are basically, it's not a grant necessarily, but it falls under their their charitable purview, where they can make investments, into projects that they think are advancing their mission in some way. So I think that combination of shift in the funding landscape is going to be really instrumental in advancing, any social good or any environmental good project. But in particular, AI for good has a lot of promise for that too. Another thing to note is that they're becoming increasingly sophisticated. So they're looking at things at, how are you quantifying your impact, right? What mitigating steps are you taking to hedge risk on any potential downsides of your technology? So it's becoming an environment where not only are the investors becoming sophisticated, but it's also pushing social entrepreneurs to be sophisticated in how they discuss their projects.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. That was an incredible answer, and I didn't know that the data behind the family offices and how they have a lot more money than other organizations. So the next question I want to ask is, I hope all three of you can take the time to answer, because we've been kind of touching upon it, and it's this concept of AI literacy, and we were talking about it before our call. Is like, there's digital literacy, then there's AI literacy, and then there's AI for good literacy, and all of those play a key role in helping to understand the AI for good movement and some of the challenges that you have all faced as well. I guess I'd go to Anita first, and then I'll go to Ellie and Charles on this. Can you elaborate a little bit on what AI literacy means within your organization, and why it's so important as a society that we work towards this?
Yep. So I want to answer in twofold, one with the organization and then one me personally, because I think that matters as well. But I think as an organization, we sell or deliver, our tools to academics, to researchers who are a incredibly bright and incredibly skeptic audience. So we are, by default, by nature, we have to train in AI literacy, right? Like when we present our tools to a group of researchers, they're not going to say, okay, cool, it kind of works. They're going to say, but why? But why is it doing this? But why do I get this? But why does it look like this? Like what is that word? And so we have to give a lecture on our NLP technology every time, which is great and it's fun. So we have that, you know, as a basic premise for what we do, is the literacy. And personally as well, I get to give a lot of talks on AI, and I think it's incredibly important for those of us who work in the field, to whatever degree we have capacity to go out and talk, especially those of us who are able to articulate what AI is, what it is not, what is hype, what is actually happening, what can we expect, ethics, biases, et cetera, to go out and actually talk to people, to go out and give talks at conferences, and to keep it at a level that people can understand without going into the technicalities. I think we somewhat have a little bit of a personal responsibility in that as well, because there is a lot of misunderstanding and there's a lot of misconceptions, and ranging all the way from fear to just like weird expectations. So we also do a lot of expectation management in delivering our tools, because people have an idea, and that idea is not always entirely realistic.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you. That's a great answer. I mean, yeah, it's like there's the high expectations, and then there's the fear factor as well, and so it kind of runs the whole gamut. Ellie, I'd love, you know, based on what Behaivior is doing, and you know, the population that you're working with, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, you know, AI literacy within your context.
Sure. Yeah, that's something, like Anita said, that's something that kind of is inherent when you're using AI within your company, particularly in the impact space where you're in the health space, where you're working with a lot of people who are have very different backgrounds, and this may be new to them. So kind of understanding the value is really important. So with Behaivior, so how we use AI to solve this problem and why we use it. Addiction is an incredibly complex disease. So the current solutions, they tend to be reactive with low efficacy rates and low adoption rates. When people in recovery from substance use disorder are in a high risk state, the propensity for relapse is high. And by the time that a traditional intervention occurs, they're often already reusing again. So with our system that we're developing that we're calling Recovery, there's an opportunity to be proactive and intervene in advance of a relapse, by providing a physiology-informed risk stratification and contact initiation paradigm in the interest of avoiding relapse. So using AI, we can do things to support people in recovery that even top quality care teams can't do. So for those that have a lot of privilege to have a full team of care providers that provide ongoing monitoring of their well-being, that's not the case for most people. And even in that context, there are things that are missed. And so while there are better health outcomes in that higher socioeconomic status population, they still have relapse and overdose rates that are high. And so using AI, we are utilizing this tool to find patterns in a plethora of data points that are physiological and behavioral, and they provide indicators of an increased likelihood for relapse, so that we can provide a real-time life-saving intervention. And these are things that we as humans can't do on our own. So using AI, we're able to not only help to provide a solution to a societal epidemic, but also we're able to help democratize addiction recovery. And that's allowing all people to access high quality precision care to support people to stay on track with their recovery process. And that's something that is really exciting to us. And we're very grateful to have this technology at our fingertips to be able to help solve this problem. And some of that can be complicated. So talking with individuals in the healthcare space, in the nonprofit space, people in recovery, we've developed terminology and educational protocols to help provide high level explanations for how this works. And that's been really crucial, and we'll definitely need to continue doing that. Additionally, we need to be better at carrying this over to the funding space so that we don't have this huge burden of explaining why this is valuable. So that's, there's an area for work around that.
Great. Thank you for that incredibly thoughtful answer and detailed around it, because it's very layered, you know. So thank you for that. Charles, you know, I'd love to hear a little bit more. We talked about it earlier about AI literacy and what it means with you. And, you know, I remember when I saw you guys in December and I recycled my cold brew coffee with TrashBot, and you helped to explain the AI behind it. So I'd love for you to kind of, you know, walk through AI literacy and what it means to CleanRobotics.
Yeah, so for us, AI literacy, it's mostly like external facing, right? So when we're speaking with a client or a funder or a well-wisher or like an academic, and as kind of Anita and Ellie touched on, a lot of it is educational stuff, and then balancing what the reality is, what it's capable of, and then addressing kind of maybe unspoken or explicit fears that people have. So for us, it's complicated because we're not just explaining the AI portion, but we're also explaining the robotic hardware portion of what our technology can do. One thing that comes up frequently is, well, you know, and this is something that usually happens if we're speaking with like the greenest of the green, right? And they're like, well, if you're sorting for people, then, you know, what are you doing about education? Are they just like not taking any lessons home? Because we spend a lot of effort trying to educate people, right? And so we have to be thoughtful about explaining why it makes sense in public settings to use a robot, because it's not the same rules that you have at home for recycling, for example, right? Or the rules change and there's really no benefit in training people on how to recycle appropriately in like one airport if they're traveling someplace else. So there's that aspect of it. Another concern that comes up with AI and robotics is, you know, are you taking people's jobs away? Then you have to explain why it makes sense to automate some jobs, right? If it's dirty, if it's boring, if it's dangerous, you don't need people doing it. And I can't think of anything more boring, dirty, or dangerous than like separating solid waste, right? Whether it's even at the level of a waste bin or at an industrial scale. And then people a lot of times, because they don't know what AI is or necessarily what it's capable of, they also don't know what you can do with the data, right? So then there's a portion of explanation around what we can do with the data, which brings up other concerns, right? What about my privacy, right? Do I have a right to privacy here? And then we kind of have to explain not just what we're doing to safeguard people's privacy, but to the extent that there's rules and regulations or best practices around safeguarding an individual's privacy, we have to go into that too. So it's AI literacy is fairly complex because it's multidisciplinary and touches potentially so many aspects of things that are sensitive and fears that are kind of primal. And there's also a massive upside. So that has to be articulated as part of AI literacy as well. And then you got to talk about science
Devin,
fiction.
just to jump in, 1 minute warning here, okay?
Okay, well, I'll just leave it at science fiction. That's another thing in the game.
Okay. You know, I mean, and thank you all three for those answers. That's, I mean, you know, AI for good is this ever-present topic, but it's not going to move forward if we as a society don't, you know, achieve digital literacy and AI literacy. And, you know, we can get into a more nuanced conversation about what that takes as a society, but, you know, all 3 points that you brought up are super relevant. So I know we're bumping up on time here, so I won't ask any more questions, but what I will do is thank all 3 of you. You know, the work you're doing is incredible, and I'm humbled to be part of the work that you're doing and get to know all 3 of you. I encourage our audience to look up your companies, to learn more about it, and try to get involved, because the work you're doing is fantastic, and we have a real potential to solve some great challenges using AI, and you 3 are leading the way. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you again for the opportunity and great panel.
Wow, thank you everyone. That was great. A big virtual round of applause for the panelists, everyone. Give it up, give it up. Be sure to make your way to do some networking right now. Go check out the virtual booths and stick around. We have more innovation stage content coming soon. Thank you.